thank you. Abiy Ahmed's government has stated that it was ready to go for peaceful resolutions towards the conflict in Tigray, and even that it had formed a committee to hold peace talks. Do you believe that this is actually happening? Have you been informed? And if so, have you engaged in any peace talks or a negotiation process?
Well, we've heard, of course, the Prime Minister addressing Parliament that he was ready to negotiate with the government of Tigray. And in fact, he has also mentioned that he has set up a committee to spearhead the negotiations process on the behalf of his government. Well, for us, it kind of tallies with what has been communicated to us by interlocutors who've been doing some sort of shuttle diplomacy between our two sides. We haven't yet had any direct engagement with the Abiy government, but we still continue to have back-channel communications, and our understanding is that there appears to be a heightened interest in giving peace a chance. And for us, peace is a strategic choice, not a tactical, not something we peddle by way of tactical considerations or to buy time or to just secure some diplomatic advantage or whatever. We believe that the interests of the people of Tigray, the security and safety of the people of Tigray, and the right to self-determination of the people of Tigray are better secured and better guaranteed peacefully. But it doesn't mean that simply because there is a declared intention on the part of the Addis Ababa authorities that will immediately translate into a real chance for peace. While we hope to capitalize on such a publicly stated promise, we, however, remain vigilant and would do everything in our power to make sure that our readiness to achieve or to realize the dreams and aspirations of the people of Tigray are still there. We'll never let our guards down, no matter what. But to the extent that there is readiness on the part of the government in Addis Ababa, the authorities in Addis Ababa, for peace, that simply tallies with our own readiness to go for peaceful resolution to a political problem, which should not have led to the kind of conflict that has claimed the lives of tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans in the first place, and other Ethiopians as well. So it's not for me to second guess his intentions. If I were to take the past as a guide, I would probably be inclined to take his gestures less seriously. But the fact that the objective reality in Ethiopia today willingly dictates the adoption of a peaceful approach to resolving the conflict, because Ethiopia is in doldrums, the economy is in doldrums, communal violence is everywhere, organized units have all but taken over monopoly of power from the government, and there is little in the way of control that the Addis authorities can exert in many parts of the country. That simply means that they would not be in a position to resolve political differences militarily. And the very military, vaunted military they have counted on to break the back of Tigrayan resistance, I don't think is in a position to secure such expectations on behalf of the government. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is an element of seriousness there, but we're not necessarily interested in counting on the seriousness or otherwise of the gesture made by the Prime Minister. What matters to us is that we are ready to resolve this conflict peacefully if possible, but we'll never let our guards down, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that the aspirations, the interests, and the existence of our people as a nation is never compromised. We have been telling our interlocutors that to the extent that there is going to be a chance for peace, we have to be clear. The resumption of services, basic services such as electricity, telecoms, banking, transport services cannot be subject for negotiations. It would be foolhardy for us to negotiate, to consider the resumption of electricity services, the resumption of telecom services as subject matter for negotiations. It's a non-starter. So we expect services to be a critical element of any overture for peace on the part of the government. We believe that they should not have been cut off. Those services should not have been cut off in the first place. So our expectation, and in fact our demand, is that if there is going to be any serious opportunity for peace that we can take seriously, and then those services need to be resumed without much ado. That's our official position. This is a position that we have duly communicated through our interlocutors to the authorities in Addis Ababa. And it's at least our hope, it remains our hope and expectation that these demands will be met. But, well, I can't speak for the government in Addis Ababa. I can only state what our demands are as far as the viability of talks are concerned. But we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that those talks that are being talked about right now do really happen, because peace, as I have said earlier, is in the best interest of the people of Tigray, while at the same time remaining vigilant about any dangerous moves on the part of repeat offenders, whether this be the Eritrea or the regime in Asmara, or its best boys in Amhara, or even the government in Addis Ababa. We will remain vigilant, but we will capitalize on whatever opportunities there is for peace. But the access issue, the services issue, is one critical component, and we don't believe this can and should be subject matter for negotiations. It is something that needs to be made even before negotiations begin.
Despite the declaration of a humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government in late March, the delivery of humanitarian assistance has been at its lowest in the first few months. There has been an improvement, progress in the past few weeks, but it's still far below meeting the needs on the ground, and the aid that has already reached Tigray is not being distributed properly as well. Is there any improvement expected soon?
Well, something to give. Whether it's going to happen soon is not a matter of choice. Like you said, following the humanitarian cessation of hostilities, there was reluctance on the part of the authorities in Addis to allow unfettered access. There were all kinds of encumbrances here and there. There have been obstacles here and there, but at least in terms of the number of trucks that are being allowed, there is a significant increase. In many cases, especially the months of May and June, it has shown marked, but still, despite the number of trucks and the increase in the number of trucks, we cannot really say that unfettered access has been allowed, because unfettered access is about putting in place a system that cannot be challenged through bureaucratic means. We have to make sure that aid agencies will be allowed to transport as much humanitarian aid as needed without any encumbrances from government authorities. In this particular case, the issue of fuel is the most problematic one, because as we speak, we have about 30,000 metric tons of food in the warehouses in Maqala. But the aid agencies who are supposed to distribute it to the needy in Tambin or in Aksum or in Adwa or in Eastern Zone or in Samra are not in a position to do so because of fuel. And the fact that they don't have fuel has nothing to do with they are not being able to secure fuel. It has everything to do with the reluctance of the government to allow sufficient fuel to come to Tigray. So what we are saying to our interlocutors is that unless the fuel issue is properly addressed, the fact that the number of trucks has increased significantly in and of itself is not going to solve the problem. In fact, the lack of fuel, which is being imposed by the government itself, is a much more vicious way of maintaining the chokehold on the people of Tigray. That's our position. So we are communicating. For example, in our discussions today, the EU Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Crisis Management, Mr. Yanis Lenarcic, was clear that the issue of fuel is very critical. Unless the food that is being transported to Maqala finds its way to the needy in Tambin or in Samra, what's the point? I mean, just moving Adama warehouses to Maqala doesn't do the trick. What matters is whether the people who need it have access to it. That's the most important issue. And other encumbrances need to be taken care of. I mean, there are haphazard ways of trying to stop. So our understanding is that the government has expressed commitment. This is what was communicated to us. And we want the government to continue to honor its promises and to do so at the soonest possible time possible, because any delay to distribute food costs us lives. And that is something that would further complicate matters. And what little opportunity there is for peace could somehow be endangered because of such problems.
As you've mentioned, an envoy from the European Union is visiting. Mr. Olusegun Obasanjo has visited recently as well. Are such visits bearing any fruit in ending the conflict peacefully?
Chief Obasanjo has traveled to Maqala about 7 times, if memory serves me right. We have had our fair share of issues with how he wanted to do business, but as long as he was representing the EU, as long as he was helping us exchange message with regard to what our positions are, his visit was more than welcome. Whether that has achieved any meaningful result remains to be seen. We don't believe it has resulted in a significantly meaningful outcome, I wouldn't say, but it is the fact that we are able to convey messages to each other served as a sort of channel of communication between our two sides. So to that extent, it was value. But there are also areas where President Debretsion insisted that Chief Obasanjo take care of before he could come up with, for example, the whole idea of a roadmap, whether he was coordinating his efforts with other people who appear to have a serious initiative in this regard, whether he was coordinating his efforts with countries and institutions that have more weight in bringing pressure to bear on the authorities in Addis. These are the kinds of things we've been advising him. It was very unfortunate sometimes. President Obasanjo, although he obviously had the best of intentions, sometimes he sounded like he was reading from the talking points of the authorities in Addis Ababa. That didn't necessarily sit well with us, but we have engaged Mr. Obasanjo with the hope and expectation that he would serve as a reliable intermediary. There are questions, and we still want to make sure that more serious and robust peace initiatives should be the ones there was too much forum shopping involved, so we simply expressed concern that something serious must come forward by way of peace initiative. But the visit by the Commissioner Lenarcic, we know that he's been meaning to visit. His main focus is humanitarian access issue, and it's very clear that humanitarian access issue, there is an increase in the number of trucks, but the issue of unfettered access is not about an increase in the number of trucks. It's about putting in place a system where the access issue would not be compromised or would not be unnecessarily complicated by bureaucratic interventions by authorities here and there. So as long as there is food, every effort should be exerted by all stakeholders to make sure that food makes it to where it is needed most, to the needy. That's one of his areas of concern. Of course, he's also very clear that the issue of services is very critical. To the extent that there is progress on the part of the Ethiopian authorities to sort of to express their readiness for peace and to be supportive of humanitarian access issues, they don't believe these are enough to normalize relations with the government. That's also our position. But they need to do more, engaging all authorities, and of course, it was also his hope and expectation that we would capitalize on whatever little opportunity there is for peace, rather than trying to solve whatever difference we have militarily. It's in our best interest, while we'll never let our guards down, and we'll reserve our right to do whatever it takes to ensure the security and safety of our people by whatever means at our disposal. We still, however, would do everything within our power to give peace a chance without compromising the fundamental interests of the people of Tigray. That's the exchange of ideas we had. Of course, President Debretsion has clearly communicated to Commissioner Lenarcic that he would welcome a much more strengthened and a much more nuanced role for EU, not only in humanitarian aspects, but also in resolving political conflicts peacefully. I think his visit highlighted how difficult the situation is. He visited either hospital, and he saw for himself how difficult the situation is when you see the fate of patients is left to the mercy of people who are low fuel or who deny fuel, and that's another area. He has seen the acute lack of medicine that is creating more difficulties, not only in either, in fact, even worse, in many parts of Tigray, the medical facilities are not functioning anymore. So his visit to that extent clearly had some results, and it's our hope and expectation that he would somehow communicate our willingness to negotiate with the authorities in Addis Ababa, and to put pressure on them to really be serious about their overtures for peace. We can just hope, but we have also clearly communicated that we cannot tolerate what is happening to our people in Western Tigray, and we expect the return of IDPs to Western Tigray, and the return to the status quo in terms of livelihood and all that to our people. Of course, the suffering of our people in Western Tigray should stop immediately, and all the forces must withdraw from Western Tigray. These are some of the ideas we've communicated to the Commissioner.
Okay, the issue of Western Tigray, while we're at it, Western Tigray remains under the occupation of the allied Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. What is the stand of the government of Tigray regarding Western Tigray, and is there anything that the government is doing to free Western Tigray?
To put it very bluntly, Western Tigray, as the name itself implies, is Western Tigray. It's not part of Amhara, it's not part of this or part of that. So nothing short of full return of Tigray control over Western Tigray would be considered positive enough development for us. So this cannot and should not be subject for negotiations. We can negotiate over how the forces are going to withdraw. I'm not sure, but this is not something we are going to negotiate. The status of Western Tigray is non-negotiable. So the most important issue for us is we insist that all forces withdraw from Western Tigray. And we want this to happen peacefully. But it doesn't mean that we are naive enough to expect that this would happen easily. So while we reserve the right to resort to any means at our disposal to ensure full control, Tigray control over Western Tigray, we would at the same time do everything to make sure that this control is regained peacefully and our people are safely returned to Western Tigray, and our people in Western Tigray get a full measure of freedom, full measure of safety and security, and that can only be achieved if the forces that are now perpetrating all kinds of crimes against our people in Western Tigray fully withdraw from that part of Tigray. That's our position.
Lastly, the government of Tigray has recently released more than 4,000 prisoners of war. What was the main reason for such a decision?
Well, one of the things Chief Obasanjo asked us to do by way of confidence-building measures was to release prisoners of war. And we said, okay. In fact, his request was for us to release about 1,000. We said we can release about 4,000. We have twice as many still, and we have already rehabilitated them. We have no business keeping more prisoners of war. So his promise was that he would convince the government to reciprocate, to take similar measures. But unfortunately for him, the government wasn't interested in not only in accepting them, but also even in recognizing the fact that there were prisoners of war. Sometimes it would boil down to the issue of semantics. They would say these are captured soldiers, not prisoners of war. I mean, what's in a name anyway? They're just prisoners of war or captured soldiers, but we wanted to hand them over to their families. And Chief Obasanjo was the man behind this, but unfortunately, he didn't even have the opportunity to do a photo op with the prisoners of war, because obviously even ICRC, who were willing to support, couldn't support because the government was not willing. So we understand the challenge, but at least this is why it was Chief Obasanjo who initiated the process. We went ahead with it anyway, despite the withdrawal of support for the process by the authorities in Addis. You're welcome.